Vaush is a centrist. Vaush is a centrist. Sargon of Akkad is a centrist.
These people need to take their own advice and investigate the true history of the workers' movement.
What did the USSR do to workers? Let me remind you for a bit. Around 40% of all victims came from Soviet Ukraine, especially from the district near the border with Poland. Among them were tens of thousands of peasants, railway workers, industrial laborers, engineers, and others. Interesting way that the USSR dealt with its workers in its workers' movement.
Within the context of politics, debates between two diametrically opposed sides can get quite heated at times. People very commonly get emotional when defending the positions they believe in or the ideas that they associate themselves with, be it because of a hardwired evolutionary impulse, or because nobody is taught how to think rationally or how to interact with and interpret scientific data. People in general do not like being told or shown that they are wrong.
I mean, I guess. But that's a strange beginning, in my opinion. That's a pretty... I don't know, it reminds me of someone. Sort of weird elitist start. People just don't know how to be rational. Like, sure. But it's a little bit of a reductive description, in my opinion.
And when someone is in their feelings, it can be very difficult to have a rational dialogue with that person. This is especially true if that individual has material interests invested in the continued upholding and espousing of the established status quo in their minds. As a wise man once said, "It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it." Why is it that people get as heated and as passionate as they do over even the most simple of political questions, such as abortion or gun control? Well, the
simple questions, you say? How is abortion a simple question? The simplest of questions. Okay, what a start. Abortion. The simplest of questions. Okay.
The first reason was already mentioned. Material interests. People tend to believe in politics that are in accordance with what they perceive as materially beneficial for themselves. The second reason is ideological, as many people tend to attach their egos and inherent personhood to their politics. The third reason has to do with the inherently violent nature.
No, that's false. That is false. People... Wait.
Personhood to their politics. Ideological, as many people tend to attach their egos and inherent personhood to...
People don't attach their personhood to their politics. In fact, it's the opposite. In fact, people's personhood is attached to politics often. Like, I'm sorry, trans people don't choose to attach their personhood to politics. Bigots choose to attach trans people's personhood to politics. It has nothing to do with ego. Wanting to, well, you know, not be genocided. I don't think it's attaching one's personhood or ego when you push for politics that will, you know, not have you killed or you fight for your rights not to be taken away. So this is a really bizarre start to this video. I know it's still early, but already I'm feeling like it feels like I'm watching the origin of language or something. I don't know.
To their politics. The third reason has to do with the inherently violent nature of politics as a whole. Beyond the political discussions and legal machinery, beyond the debates and the bureaucracy, all politics boils down to violence at the end of the day, or at the very least, the threat of violence. As a wise man once said, all political power flows through the barrel of a
Mao
gun.
Zedong.
Politics as we know
Oh
it is about
boy.
the conflicting interests of different groups of people,
I see.
and having an established arena that is legitimized in the public eye, where these groups can find satisfactory resolutions to their disputes without killing each other. That being said, political conflicts can, and frequently have, spiraled out of control and devolved into exactly that. Both sides trying to kill each other. While outright warfare has historically been a very effective avenue of conflict resolution, there are a number of problems with war, which is why many prefer to rule it out as an option. The first major problem is that war is very risky, and there's a chance that your side could lose. The second is that war is very costly.
Historically speaking, war was not because people did not agree politically. It was because people wanted land. Like, reasons for war went a little bit beyond just, oh, I disagree with you politically, so we go to war. So, again, I'm not so sure about this claim.
Not just in resources, but in human life as well. Cities can be rebuilt, but you can't bring back the dead. And because war is very risky and very costly, nobody wants to participate. In general, most human beings, regardless of their convictions or macho man bravado, are cowards when it comes to their own lives. Unless backed into a corner and given no other option, it is incredibly difficult to get anyone actually willing to take up arms for a given cause.
I mean, sure, in natural right theory, the threat of one's natural rights being taken away is the basis for the formation of government. Politics may be influenced by a threat of violence, but politics is not violence, nor driven solely by it.
While there are plenty of instances where disputes can be settled and conflict resolution can be reached peacefully, there are also many instances where the ultimate solution to a problem will necessitate the outright coercion and repression of one group to the benefit of the other. These distinct groups of people, or dare I say classes, are frequently at odds with one another, be it between the slaves and their masters, be it between women and the patriarchy, or be it between wage laborers and capital. The emerging politics of class struggle is that of a zero-sum game. And so throughout the centuries, as the wheels of class antagonism grind against one another, we have reached new levels of social development, one where we all agree that murder should be illegal, that slavery should be outlawed, and that women are deserving of equal rights to a man. These are all policies that inherently restrict the freedom of the individual, but have made all of society more prosperous and better off for it as a result. Paradoxically enough, restricting certain personal liberties has increased all of our freedom collectively. And how do these restrictions on a personal level get enforced? Through the state and legal system, of course. Again, underlying all politics is the threat of violence. We are physically coerced by way of threats to adhere to these laws, lest we face arrests, beatings, executions, fines, bail, and even jail time. Back to the question of heated discussions and
I don't think that's a thing anymore, facing beatings, but
diametrically opposed sides that are irreconcilable with
it's a common belief among some communist politics is war without bloodshed.
One another. To the political layman, who is not informed about a thing one way or another, who is uninvested in the topic and can only see two monkeys shouting at one another as they watch vicariously from the sidelines, it can be tempting to maintain a position of neutrality, even if the thing is inherently dichotomous and there's only one clear-cut answer. I'm not going to sit here and say that all centrist-minded people are the same. Some of them are more left-leaning, others more right-leaning. Many are simply the way that they are due to the lack of exposure. But regardless of which direction that they lean, they are all unified by their aversion to radical change, the desire to preserve the present state of things, and at their very core, their ideological commitments to what they perceive as the golden mean. The golden mean fallacy, or argumentum ad medium, is a logical fallacy in which an individual argues that the truth behind a discussion must reside.
There's actually nobody in particular. I'm just drawing a face.
Somewhere in the center, presupposing that their argument is correct by virtue of residing within the middle ground between two diametrically opposed positions.
It restricts people's right to lord over women, for example. which I hope this person is not making this argument because it would be pretty silly.
Positions. The weak link of centrism is that we're not talking about how much salt to put in a boiling pot of soup. We're not talking about some hypothetical thought experiments in which the discussion at hand bears no connection to material reality. We're talking about critical questions of the day that are directly impacting people's lives. Of course, centrism, alongside leftism and rightism, are relative to the times and to the subject matter at hand.
Wow.
So of course,
I've never heard the word rightism before.
if you were to ask a modern
I gotta admit, I've never heard the word rightism before this video used.
centrist, if say slavery is morally permissible, they'll be like, yeah, no, duh, of course slavery is wrong. Because once again, wherever the political center resides depends on the level of historical development at the time. If you were to say, hop inside a time-traveling DeLorean and take a trip back to ancient Rome, and ask a centrist of that time if slavery is okay, then they would probably tell you, yeah, no, duh, of course slavery is okay, before providing you with a slew of ideological rationalizations as to why that is. Under a best-case scenario, they would agree that there should be laws protecting slaves from being abused by their masters. As for the abolition of slavery itself, if you were to ask them about that, they would probably tell you something along the lines of, that is way too radical for my liking. Now's not the right time to abolish slavery. We need to wait and trust in the Roman Senate to do the right thing. After all, it's wrong for the slaves to overthrow and kill their masters. What's that? You don't think it's wrong for the slaves to use violence to liberate themselves from the violence of those controlling them? You're no better than the slavers who use violence to browbeat and abuse their subjects. And if you were to hop back inside that time-traveling DeLorean and fast forward to the present to ask a centrist about Israel...
I mean, it does sort of feel that way sometimes, to be honest. That certain centrists would actually...
in Palestine.
I have heard the term rightist in older books, or will use the term. Oh. Well, I'm not saying that it's used incorrectly. I'm just saying that I've not heard it before.
They'll say something like, that's a pretty complicated question. I believe in a two-state solution. Even though the Israelis stole all of Palestine's land and drove them from their homes with mortars and shell fire, they still have a right to be there just as much as the Palestinians do. And this is just one of many examples of what political centrism sounds like. Another example...
I mean, this person is pro-USSR, I will guess, from what I've heard. And I would just like to remind that the USSR, at first, actually supported Zionism. Believe it or not, the USSR, at first, actually liked the idea of the State of Israel and wanted to use it as a tool against the West. But when it turned out that Israel will not be a tool against the West, well, suddenly they became the imperialists.
When people say, we need a mix of socialism and capitalism. We need social democracy. We need the Nordic model. Whenever you hear a centrist-aligned person say something like this, you can immediately tell that they have an incredibly weak grasp of the topic at hand, and instead of taking some time to learn additional information about the subject, they opt for adopting what they perceive as the safest, easiest, and most uncontroversial positions in their minds. Theoretically, the centrist position is supposed to be the compromise between two opposing sides, but in practice, there seldom actually is. Taking social democracy as an example yet again, i.e., we need a mix of socialism and capitalism, social democracy is not a meaningful compromise between labor and capital, since the capitalists are still in control of everything and still own all of the means of production. But only now, they're just paying out more in taxes to finance the social safety nets and are treating the workers more kindly. But irrespective of the...
Yes, when the USSR did not like Zionism anymore, all of a sudden all Jewish people were accused of being Zionists, including Bundists, were very explicitly anti-Zionist.
Sock-fash bribery, since the underlying power relations haven't changed, the capitalist can easily take it all away through austerity, tax cuts, and deregulations over time, and they are in the process of taking it away as we speak, and the working class is virtually powerless to do anything about it. Ultimately, there can be no compromise between labor and capital, since the struggle between the two is a zero-sum game. Ideological centrists fancy themselves as a form of compromise between the two, but if the status quo itself is what is directly responsible for giving rise to the inequalities and injustices that we see in the world today, and centrists are inherently opposed to the legwork and radical social changes needed in order to reconcile these systematic problems at a fundamental level, can it really be said that centrists really are these neutral arbiters of reason that they envision themselves as?
Well, no.
Is to be one who is fundamentally opposed to social change not the very definition of what it means to be a conservative? With respect to politics, the correct position is usually a straightforward answer backed by overwhelming amounts of evidence and is logically and ethically consistent, while the other side is propped up by billionaire-backed think tanks, cherry-picked data that omits anything that might contradict the conclusion, along with a myriad of conservative social values, emotional appeals, cognitive dissonance, and sophistry. Now, I'm not saying that there
President Sunday made this point. Centrism is right-wing more coherently. Yeah, and I agree with this, by the way.
aren't many questions or topics that are worthy of debate where the jury is still out on a definitive conclusion. There certainly are. However, there are also many questions where the case should be closed by now, and we as a society should have moved on onto more relevant subjects and issues at hand.
Interesting.
I.e., is racism bad? Do women deserve rights? Is climate change real? Do we need to redistribute wealth? These are questions that we, as a society, should have reached a consensus on by now. And yet liberal centrist talking heads still feel the need to engage with a political minority of buffoons that either still haven't gotten the memo or evidently don't want to get the memo. What centrists are doing in treating both sides of a given debate as equals and putting so much emphasis on free speech and the marketplace of ideas is, in effect, A, implicitly discrediting the far left by effectively lumping us in with the far right, and B, legitimizing and granting credence to the positions of the far right, positions that may not be worthy of credence or legitimacy in the first place by virtue of how actively damaging they are to varying demographics of people.
I only usually hear, ironically enough, I usually only hear far righters or centrists use the term far left.
To briefly comment on that first point,
possible.
Liberals constantly invoke horseshoe theory when in debates with socialists and communists, characterizing us as authoritarian extremists and genocide apologists. They frequently lump historical figures such as Hitler and Stalin together.
Well, I'm just gonna say that anybody who is at least a bit historically literate and Marxist-Leninists are oftentimes not. Okay. Well, let's wait.
Despite the fact that one of these men started the Holocaust, while the other one ended the Holocaust. These people are either ignorant.
Stalin did not end the Holocaust. I'm just gonna put this to bed. Stalin did not end the Holocaust. And all of the liberations of the camps happened because they were stops along the way, not because they were goals to liberate. So let's put that myth to rest. In fact, Stalin had his own anti-Semitic machinery going. Also Ribbentrop-Molotov.
to or willingly ignore the fact that the greatest anti-fascist force in history has been the communist movement abroad, and that it has been the liberal Western powers that are the ones who have historically and contemporarily been the greatest enablers and supporters of fascism globally for...
Is that so? Ribbentrop-Molotov, German troops training in the USSR before the war. The USSR destroying socialist movement in Poland post-World War II.
For centuries. And despite the fact that the Soviets sacrificed astronomical amounts of human life in order to stop the Nazis...
And I really find it silly and ridiculous to equate communism with the USSR. And socialism for that matter. There were many different models of socialism that were not the USSR. Not to even mention that the USSR was not socialist to begin with. It was a dictatorship and not of the proletariat.
Centrists can't help but lump the two together regardless, all because of the aesthetic similarities along with a neutrality pact that the Soviets...
Yeah, you know, the aesthetic similarities of committing genocide. The aesthetic similarities.
Signed with the Nazis in a desperate bid to buy time after France and Britain repeatedly ignored their calls for a united...
Ah, yes. The desperate invasion of Poland. The desperate carving Poland between two countries. Somehow, there was no desperate move such as, I don't know, supporting Poland in its fight against Germany. That didn't actually cross the USSR's mind. That's interesting, isn't it? The desperate ethnic cleansing that happened in Lviv, that happened in Vilnius, those were dictated by desperation, pure desperation. It was simply unavoidable, the ethnic cleansing that happened.
Front against Italian and
In
German...
fact, the mass execution of Polish people by the USSR was, I guess, it was unavoidable either. How is this guy making this point while being on the right himself? I would be experiencing a bit of cognitive dissonance. Well, this person is a Stalinist, so... I mean, I get the claim that, oh, a lot of self-espoused centrists are more right-leaning. Even Hitler feigned centrism during his Munich speech. But much how MLs are not representative of all socialists, so too are these centrists not necessarily representative of the whole. There's a important reason why centrists basically support the right, whether they like it or not. It's because if you are looking between, for example, if you're, let's say, trans rights, the left says, don't take away trans rights. The right says, take away trans rights. The centrists say, let's find a compromise between these two. In practice, the compromise between not taking away rights and taking away rights is closer to supporting taking away rights. Like, this is just unfortunately how it works. Oh, what's this?
Oh, Barry!
Thank you for the 5 tier 1 subscriptions. Karaso Kafka, Gabriel, RKL, Moose Watcher. Here, thank you. Oh my gosh. I'm gonna check something. Let me see. Oh. Oh damn, wait. How can you compare Hitler to Stalin? Well, let me tell you. Because there are a few things that we can, there are a few ways we can tackle this subject. But let's just go with the facts, shall we? How can we compare the USSR, Hitler to Stalin? Let's start with this, shall we? Stalin was an anti-Semite. Polish operation of the NKVD. It happened between 1937 and 1938. So this shall be our entry point. And then we'll move to something else. The Polish operation of the NKVD, Soviet Security Service, in 1937-1938 was an anti-Polish mass ethnic cleansing operation of the NKVD carried out in the Soviet Union against Poles, labeled by the Soviet as agents. During this period of the Greater Purge, it was ordered by the Politburo of the Communist Party against so-called Polish spies, and customarily interpreted by NKVD officials as relating to absolutely all Poles. Wow. This comparison to Hitler is so off base, I cannot believe. It resulted in the sentencing of 139,835 people and summary executions of 111,091 Poles living in or near the Soviet Union. The operation was implemented according to NKVD Order number 004485, signed by Nikolai Yezhov. Wow! The USSR is being so slandered here. Can you believe it? Can you believe that the USSR would do something like this? But it's the Soviet Union. It just wants fairness for everybody. Didn't it? Didn't it? Well, let's find out. Let's find out, shall we? Let's continue reading because this is not looking good. This is not looking good. But maybe it'll get better. We'll see. Maybe it gets better once all the spies get killed. The majority of the shooting victims were ethnically Polish, but not all, with some belonging to various minority groups from the Kresy macro-region, for instance, Lithuanians. These groups in the Soviet worldview had some element of Polish culture or heritage and were therefore also Polish. Lithuanians, by the way, are Ukrainians and Belarusians. Just so you know, this is who Lithuanians are. We can even click. I did not expect that Russia saw Lithuanians as Polish people. So there we are. So Lithuanians were also Polish, of course, which weren't Ukraine. Didn't Russia say that Ukrainian people were like little Russian brothers or something and sisters? Well, that's pretty incoherent. I'm surprised they even saw Lithuanians as people, given their horrid track record when it comes to ethnic minorities. Well, they decided that they were Polish. These groups in the Soviet worldview had some element of Polish culture or heritage and were therefore also Polish. There we go. The remainder were subsected of being Polish without further inquiry, or classified as possibly having pro-Polish sympathies. The NKVD agents looked through local phone books to expedite the procedure and detain people with names that sounded Polish. Wow. Damn. That sounds nothing like Hitler. Well, it's just spies. It's just, you know, it says here. Look, it says here. And we all know that the Soviet Union can be, you know, you can trust the Soviet Union or else you're a centrist. Let me see. Polish spies. See? We're looking for Polish spies on the yellow pages. That is how you find spies, right? You just randomly look for them on the yellow pages. Are guilty by charge of suspicion of being Polish. A Polish spy. Polish spy. Don't get it mixed up. I'm sure all the good Polish people were spared. You're being very centrist right now. You're being very centrist right now. Don't be centrist. Don't you know that Stalin was a great man? The USSR was a great country. Don't you know how amazing the USSR was? Well, let's continue. This gets better, I'm sure. The Polish operation was the largest ethnic shooting and deportation action during the Great Purge campaign of political murders in the Soviet Union. Wow. Damn. But, you know, there were probably over 100,000 spies. It's, you know. I'm willing to believe that's true. I'm willing to believe that the USSR simply happened to execute over 100,000 spies. The operation took place approximately from August 25, 1937 to November 15, 1938. The largest group of people with a Polish background, around 40% of all victims, came from Soviet Ukraine, especially from the districts near the border with Poland. Among them were tens of thousands of peasants. Ooh, interesting. Peasant spies. You know, that is how socialists and communism is supposed to work. Execute the proletariat, you know? You execute the proletariat for being spies. Well, he did jail the Jewish doctors, but that's a long story. Those pesky proletarian spies, that's true. Enamel would probably argue that Wikipedia is not a propaganda. Oh, if the author of this video watches this segment and calls into question this, then I will look for sources other than Wikipedia. Oh, there are, trust me, there are a lot of different sources than the Wikipedia around all of this. So that's not a problem. I'll go to the archives and look for first-hand sources of this crap happening. I'll do it. But let's just continue reading for now. If it's not a long story, Stalin was racist and he jailed Jewish doctors because he was racist. I mean, yeah, but there is a whole story around it, so we might do a segment about it in the future because I know what you're talking about. So yeah. Peasants, railway workers, industrial laborers, engineers, and others. So the proletariat was executed. But there was a thing against Jewish doctors. That's actually not a joke. That was actually a thing, a big thing. Christ, this is awful. It seems like their logic, I'm being generous by calling it logic, was literally like somebody speaks a language which isn't Russian, said somebody is a spy. I know it was. Okay, I misunderstood. I apologize. I misunderstood your joke. I never ignore my gigglers. I never ignore my viewers. You're not a failed comedian. So far we know that the proletariat was executed because of their ethnic background. I mean, because of being spies. An additional 17% of victims came from Soviet Belarusia, so Belarus. The rest came from around Western Siberia and Kazakhstan, where exiled Poles had lived since the partitions of Poland, the partitions of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, as well as from the southern Urals, northern Caucasus, and the rest of Siberia, including the Far East. Amazing. How could you ever compare how could you ever say that the Soviet Union was a despotic country? The following categories of people were arrested by the NKVD during its Polish operation as described in Soviet documents. All anti-Soviet and nationalistic elements from districts and regions in the USSR where there existed a Polish community. All immigrants from the Second Polish Republic, political exiles from Poland, former and present members of the Polish Socialist Party, and other non-communist Polish political parties. So, socialists have to be executed. Amazing. Socialists are the enemies as well. Yes, this ethnically Polish from the eastern steppes who has never once been to Poland is clearly a spy from Poland. True, you're right. And therefore it was okay for the Soviet Union to execute. Damn. All prisoners of war from the Polish-Soviet War remaining in the Soviet Union. Wow. Well, we all know how the Soviet Union and Russia deals with prisoners of war. It's not surprising. We see what happens to prisoners of war during the Ukraine-Russia war. So, yeah, we all know what happens. We see it televised currently. So that's not a shocker. Any rescued Ukrainian prisoner of war will tell you how Russia treats the prisoners of war. Well, at least when it comes to being a prisoner of war in Russian hands. Members of the Polish military organization listed in the special list. All clerical elements having had some kind of connection with Poland. So all priests, because all priests are spies, as we all know. It's common knowledge, really. Slava Ukraina. True. Slava Ukraini. Yes. Heroim Slava. But yes, I guess all peasants and... I said it in Spanish. Oh, okay. Slava Ukraina. In Spanish I said save Ukraine. Salva Ukraina. Okay, that's cool. Save Ukraine. True. I say Slava Ukraini. And here I am, Slava. Okay. So as we have learned so far, all peasants and clerics must be spies and therefore executed. I've learned so much about the greatness of the Soviet Union. Of course, Russia bad, etc., etc., but in war, both sides tend to do bad things. You can control every person, and the longer conflict goes, the more embittered and mentally unhinged people tend. No, that's not that is not what we're talking about. Greater range. We're talking about a systemic thing. Of course, I should be executed. I'm a spy. Of course, I'm a spy. So no, that's not what we're talking about. Controlling every person. This is a thing that's happening on a systemic scale. This is a policy of how prisoners of war are being treated. Not some sort of, a rogue soldier decided to be mean to prisoners. That is not what's happening here. Oh yes, comrade, this tree looks a bit suspicious. Must be a spy for Poland. Gotta wipe out Poland now. Well, you know. One day I'm gonna start a spy family. Or something. There's a manga like that. Ethnic breakdown. Let's go. Ethnic breakdown. Although the Soviet authorities claim that the executed victims were all ethnic Poles, some of those killed were also ethnic Belarusians, Jewish people, Ukrainians, and Russians. Mistaken and alleged for being ethnic Poles due to their surnames or religious denominations. 37.3% of the total number of Poles who were arrested in Belarus were actually ethnic Belarusian Catholics, of whom many declared themselves to be Poles in the 1920s. They made up 14.2% of those arrested in the Polish operation across the Soviet Union. November 1938. 13.4% of those arrested were ethnic Ukrainians. 8.8% of the arrested were ethnic Russians. Wow. Killing process and death toll. We're not going to be on this article much longer. We've got more to go through. According to the archives of the NKVD, 111,091 Poles and people accused of ties with Poland were sentenced to death, and 28,744 were sentenced to labor camps. 139,835 victims in total. What a small number. This number constitutes 10% of the total number of people officially convicted during the Jeżowszczyzna period, based on confirming NKVD documents. According to historian Bogdan Musiał, it is estimated that Polish losses in the Ukrainian SSR were about 30%, while the Belarusian SSR, the Polish minority was almost completely annihilated or deported. Musiał is also of the opinion that it does not seem unlikely, as Soviet statistics indicate that the number of Poles dropped from 792,000 in 1926 to 627,000 in 1939. Vive l'Ukraine libre! There you go. I speak French. Here we go. Or maybe Viva. Viva l'Ukraine libre! There you go. Almost all victims of the NKVD shootings were men, wrote Michał Jasiński. Most with families. Their wives and children were dealt with by the NKVD order number 00486. The women were generally sentenced to deportation to Kazakhstan for an average of 5 to 10 years. Orphaned children without relatives willing to take them were put in orphanages to be brought up as Soviet, with no knowledge of their origins. All possessions of the accused were confiscated. The parents of the executed men, as well as their in-laws, were left with nothing to live on, which usually sealed their fates as well. Statistical extrapolation, wrote Jasiński, increases the number of Polish victims in 1937-1938 to around 200 or 250,000, depending on the size of their families. In Leningrad, the NKVD reviewed local telephone books and arrested almost 7,000 citizens with Polish-sounding name, with the vast majority of such nominal suspects were executed within 10 days of arrest. I told you, we're looking for spies in the Yellow Pages. In the village of Belostok, Tomsk Oblast, Siberia, 100 men of Polish origins were executed and their bodies thrown into the Ob River. Wow. How could you ever compare Stalin to Hitler? How could you ever do that? So centrist. So centrist. Such centrist behavior. Assessment. According to historian Michael Ellman, the national operations of 1937-38, notably the Polish operation, may qualify as genocide as defined by the UN Convention. Well. The US are committing genocide. What do you know? When answering the question, how could you ever compare Stalin to Hitler? we've discovered a little bit of a genocide. Well, well, well. Who could have guessed? We all could have guessed. Let's be quite honest. We all could have guessed. Although there is as yet no legal ruling on the matter, Karol Karski argues that the Soviet actions against Poles are genocide according to international law. He says that while the extermination was targeting other nationalities as well, and according to the criteria other than ethnicity, but as long as Poles were singled out based on their ethnicity, that makes the actions to be genocide. The historian Terry Martin refers to the national operations, including the Polish operation, as ethnic cleansing and ethnic terror. According to Martin, the singling out of a diaspora nationalities for arrest and mass execution verged on the genocidal. Historian Timothy Schneider called the Polish operation genocidal. It is hard not to see the Soviet-Polish operation of 1947-48 as genocidal. Polish fathers were shot, Polish mothers sent to Kazakhstan, and Polish children left in orphanages, where they would lose their Polish identity. As more than 100,000 innocent people were killed, on the spurious grounds that theirs was a disloyal ethnicity, Stalin spoke of Polish filth. On the other hand, Stalin often praised Poland as a good nation and the Poles as brave fighters, the third most dogged soldiers after the Russians and Germans. Norman Naimark called Stalin's policy towards Poles in the 1930s genocidal, but did not consider the entire Great Purge genocidal since it targeted political opponents as well. Simone Sebag Montefiore presents a similar opinion. According to historians Ole Soundstrom and Andrei Kotyarchuk, most scholars, for example Nicholas Firth, Michael Mann, and Hiroaki Kuromiya, focus on the security dilemma in the borders areas, suggesting the need to secure the ethnic integrity of Soviet space vis-a-vis neighboring capitalist enemy states. They stress the role of international relations and believe that representatives of ethnic minorities such as the Poles were killed not because of their ethnicity but because of their possible relations to countries hostile to the USSR and fear of disloyalty in the case of an invasion. Interesting. Real communism in action. Killing all the proletariat when they're the wrong ethnicity. Here we go. Let's watch some more of this.
Aggression. I find it ironic that these people are such principled anti-fascists when it comes to what they perceive as red fascism.
So this is very interesting. Oh, Vaush is a centrist now. Vaush is a centrist. Vaush is a centrist. How interesting. How fascinating.
Or woke fascism on the far left, treating communists and advocates of decolonization with the utmost aggression and wanton hostility.
No. Marxist-Leninism is not the only face of communism or socialism, and neither is Maoism. In fact, let's return to the article for a bit. Who were among those executed by the USSR? Who were the Polish people among those executed? Former and present members of the Polish Socialist Party. That doesn't add up. No, does it?
I think a person who says ethnostates are okay is on a much worse level than your average anti-Semite, sexist, racist, transphobe, whatever. Ethnostates are the most destructive creation, like, that has ever been born of man.
I mean, the USSR seemed to believe in the idea of ethnostates. It had to eliminate all the unsubordinate ethnicities. For example, the Poles.
The people who are... No, I do get it. I just think it makes you insufferable and sociologically ignorant. Do you think the black people, who are by far the majority, have a right to remove the white population?
Yeah, I think so. I think they have the right to discuss what to do about that and do that. But I think that would be really harsh. And I think that they're not even going to do that.
Out of curiosity, do you know how many Jews died in the Holocaust?
I mean, the USSR implemented this into practice, as we've just seen. So it's not just theoretical for the USSR. USSR put the ideas into practice.
Do you know what Hitler tried to do with them before the Holocaust began?
See, this is what I'm saying. Like,
Answer the
me being
question.
like people should have the right to self-determination.
Answer the question.
You are literally comparing me to Hitler and Nazis right now.
But then are more than willing to repudiate those principles and throw them right out the fucking window when it comes to any actual far-right individuals with whom they share allegiances with, going out of their way to kiss the asses of and platform Zionist ethno-nationalists and NATO war criminals in a positive light.
My name is John Ponce.
NATO war criminals.
Recently retired from the military on the 1st of January after 24 years. In my career, I was originally an infantry officer.
Aristocracy, the Zionist nationalists. No. Nope.
And I served in the 82nd Airborne Division. And I was part of the initial Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003. Also part of the first elections in 2005 in Mosul. After that, I joined the Special Forces and spent the rest of my career, the last 15 years or so, in the U.S. Special Forces. So there's a not so brief introduction, but I hope that's enough.
Well, you have done many things, so it makes sense. Yeah, you've. I have not done anything in my life as much as you've done any of the things that you just talked about. I have so many questions.
I mean, I suppose fellow traveler would have this person executed, as all of the undesirables.
First of all, and I know I already said this, but to reiterate, thank you very much for coming on. I really do appreciate it. Wow, okay. Whew. So,
this is what
Vaush says, thank you for coming on to everybody, so let's not get overexcited.
But years of actively refusing to engage with the literature as to avoid coming to any hardline leftist conclusions and maintain...
Ah, yes, this person has clearly checked the literature. This person is clearly familiar with the literature. And we're not done, by the way. This is hardly the last of...
maintaining a pro-status quo neutrality bias in order to pander to the center and to avoid upsetting any liberal...
Ah, yes, Vaush, the biggest of centrists.
...sensibilities gets you. It gets you phony anti-fascism, but sincere anti-communism. Because fervently trying...
Communism is not defined by the USSR. Communism is not defined by China. There were many socialist movements that had nothing to do with the USSR. They were socialist movements that defied the USSR, that stood against the USSR. There were communists that were against the USSR. Let's not even try to pretend that's not the case.
Trying to maintain the status quo at all costs will sooner or later bring a fascist out of the centrist.
Their ideology was not aligned with reality.
How can you tell?
Because Jews don't actually control banks in the world.
There was a disproportionate number of Jewish control of
Oh, interesting. That's a totally honest framing of this discussion. But yeah, it's whatever. I'm used to Marxist, Leninists, communists to do dishonest framing, to do dishonest clipping, to juggle with historical facts, to twist historical facts. I'm used to it. Regurgitating Nazi propaganda to trigger and wound up the tankies.
banks in Germany during the Weimar Republic.
All right, Vaush, we're done here. Thank you. Goodbye.
Back to the second point on knowingly platforming the far right for the sake of debate and hearing out both sides. We already know, based on my personal
The enemy is both strong and weak.
experience, that centrists don't sincerely want to hear out both sides, regardless of their posturing.
Vaush is not a centrist. Come on, that's ridiculous.
Considering we literally,
No, I don't.
they
I don't
saved the
compare
world from.
communists to Nazis.
I am a
compare the
communist.
Soviets to it. You're not.
Yeah, I
You're
am.
a Soviet. You're a Soviet defender. It was bourgeois propaganda.
True.
All right, so every time.
Wait, what did I say? Oh no, you're exactly like the reason why I'm being rude to you is because, as far as I'm concerned, you're a pestilence on my movement. You're a group of state.
Okay, this is just ridiculous clipping.
Shipping
You're a
autographs
I don't get anything from those sound bites. Nothing.
who completely misunderstand what socialism
Since
is
when
and don't
does-
understand that.
since
Wait,
when is it
you
your
actually
movement?
have to stop. You actually
Since
have
when
to
is
stop
it your
it.
movement?
But for the sake of this thought exercise,
True.
let us pretend for a second that they actually do. What intrinsic value is there in having a debate over race realism and the Jewish question? Two conspiracy theories perpetrated by the far right to justify their support for racial supremacy, eugenics, and ethnic cleansing. Sure, it might be entertaining to watch these fools get dunked on from time to time,
Vaush is one for vehemently opposing something. This guy's literally doing centuries about Stalinism. He's so blind. LMAO. True. Well, no. He's not doing centrism about Stalinism. He's doing worse. He's saying, no, Stalin was good. Stalinism is good. To be a true communist is to be a brave Stalinist. Jesus.
but by wasting our efforts debating these people, especially on these big streaming platforms, we are, in effect, legitimizing these incredibly damaging ideas.
Yeah, no duh. Of course racism bad. What's that, good sir? You say racism not bad? How about we debate and I indulge you with way more good faith, respect, and charitability than the communists I'm constantly comparing you to? Please let me hear you out and allow you to explain your case in the most compelling way imaginable to thousands of young and impressionable teenagers.
I'm sorry. I'm not willing to hear out somebody who's a genocide denier.
It is at this point that one might argue, but Trav, if these ideas really are as faulty and as incorrect as you say, then the interlocutor should be able to demonstrate it easily within the context of the political arena. It should be relatively easy to sway people away from these incredibly dangerous and incorrect positions if what you say is true, right? Well, I'm glad you asked. In a perfect world where everyone had perfect logic and access to information, you would be correct. However, we don't
Yes,
live in a
you would be a Stalinist. What was that number of Polish people executed again? What was that? Oh, 111,091. Oh.
in a perfect world. Most people are not taught how to think logically or critically. On the contrary,
Yeah, I know. You're one such example.
the powers that be are constantly feeding everyone bullshit through the media, working their primitive lizard brain impulses and emotionally manipulating them for short-term gain.
Well, that's projection if ever I've seen.
And it is an unfortunate fact. But people
It
do
is.
not have a natural bullshit radar installed into their brains at birth.
I've noticed throughout this video, I have noticed this trend. Yeah, indeed.
Ability to detect bullshit is a skill that has to be cultivated and developed independently.
True.
But unfortunately, it's not. Lord
Well, maybe you should go out and get it. Then
knows the exact opposite is happening when you spend hours listening to morons like these.
or this.
Furthermore, we are living in a post-truth era where many people can just cope by cherry-picking what they want to believe based purely on how they feel.
Right. Well said. Well said, fellow traveler.
I vividly remember in a discussion that I recently had with an ideologically committed centrist that I know in my personal life about the Holodomor.
Oh.
Naturally, this person is very pro-
The Holodomor, the thing that is accepted as genocide by many UN countries. But that must be part of a big anti-communist conspiracy. What? Ukraine itself says that it's genocide and that Ukrainians were genocided. They must be lying. The victims are lying, of course. This a total lie, I assure you.
NATO and very interested in the Russia-Ukraine war. They insisted up and down that Russia
Oh yeah, because of course Russia is in the right when it comes to this war, isn't it? It's actually the evil Ukraine that is trying to slander Russia. For sure.
carried out a genocide against Ukraine in the 1930s. I explained that no historian, not a single expert on the subject,
Not a single expert on the subject. What about Lemkin?
not even
The person who created the term genocide.
most fervent anti-communists, be it Robert Conquest or Stephen Kotkin,
Robert Conquest actually in a pretty recent interview said, actually, we might as well watch the interview. Robert Conquest, huh? Okay. He does not want to use the term genocide because it's because people think the Holocaust, but let me see, because this is actually very interesting. I'm liking this very much. Let me see. Robert Conquest, huh? Let me find it. It's in here somewhere. Because as reluctant as he is to use the term genocide, interview
would tell you that that famine was a deliberate genocide. And yet, despite explaining this
no historian would say that it was deliberate genocide. Okay. Let's look at an interview with I can see the trouble. It included partial attempts on nationality. I don't think the word genocide as such is a very useful one. When I say if you want to use it, you can, but it was invented for rather different purposes. I can see that the trouble is it implies that somebody, some other nation or a larger part of it were doing it. That the Nazis are more or less implicated, they are Germans. But I don't think this is true. It wasn't a Russian exercise, the attack on Ukrainian people, but it was a definite attack on them, as they were discriminated against as far as death went. But it didn't mean if you were Russian you were doing very well in Stalin's time either. But it was a definite attack on them as they were discriminated against as far as death went. So, does Robert Conquest say that it was absolutely not a targeted attack? It doesn't seem that way. There we go. But I think it's a good thing that the famine should be recognized. It's an odd thing, but I was asked by the Holocaust. I was asked by the Holocaust Foundation. They asked me to speak on the famine, on the Ukrainian famine, some years ago, and it's still on the record. They asked the Armenians to do the same. At that time, the Ukrainian ambassador in Washington came to the Holocaust Museum, so the Jews were not forcing it as the same thing at all. That's the other danger. Once you start using these terms, you have to be not only just as bad, but just the same as Jewish genocide. And it's not the same. As long as that's recognized, and I think there are guilty people, but they aren't the Russian nation or anybody else. They are a particular group of particularly horrible people. Wow! That does not seem like Robert Conquest saying that there was no targeted attack at all. How interesting. How interesting.
Fact, they pointed out to how multiple NATO-aligned countries are now recognizing the famine as such. Is that a conspiracy of the evil Western countries? Asked them who we are to believe. The scientific experts who devote their lives studying these things?
Are you going to quote any of them? Are you going to cite any of them? This book, The Great Hunger in Ukraine. It's a collection of primary sources, orders, documents, letters. This book comes with the conclusion that it was genocide. There's a book on genocides that has 2 huge chapters on the Holodomor, also calling it a genocide. So no, it is not true. It is not even close to the truth that most experts disagree that it was a genocide. That is simply not true. Scientific experts, genocide isn't something you can derive from scientific inquiry. History isn't a science. Well, that's another thing. But yes, it is absolutely false. It is absolutely false that most historians do not agree that the Holodomor was not a genocide. Again, if this person watches this video and disagrees with my claim, I will gladly cite the sources.
Or a bunch of politicians who will
I will gladly cite the sources, because the sources are there, including primary sources. How many primary sources has fellow traveler looked at? I'm willing to guess not a lot.
push whatever narrative that they need to in order to drum up anti-Russian hysteria.
Yes. It's all anti-Russian hysteria. But wait! I thought the USSR was not Russia. I thought it was the Soviet Union of the Soviet people who were not Russian. So how can it be anti-Russian hysteria if it was the Soviet Union? Apologies. Also, hello, our family. You seem to be new to the... You seem to be new. What brings you to the stream? I always ask when I see a new face or a new name in the chat. So yes.
To manufacture consents for their proxy war. Their response was very telling. They essentially dismissed the question and went on to say that since everyone is biased and we all pick and choose what we want to believe, that...
Wait, how did you find this stream? I do need to know. But yes, the Soviet Union was totally not ideologically inclined to hide this, politically inclined. Ribbentrop-Molotov was a purely defensive pact. Okay. Why was Ribbentrop-Molotov forbidden from being taught at schools in Poland when Poland was communist? Why is that? Answer me this. Riddle me this. Why was Ribbentrop-Molotov banned from being taught at schools in Poland? Riddle me this. Why did the Soviet Union try to completely cover up the Holodomor, including the fact that it happened at all? It should be on. You should be able to see the YouTube chat.
Oh, Barry!
Thank you for the tier 1 subscription, fake helicopter. Better not be evil. You better not be evil. True. You can use the emotes now. Where's the chat? People are simply not chatting. Yeah, people are simply not chatting in the YouTube chat or something, or it froze. It's just not showing for some reason. Alright. Hello, Lucy, sorry. I can see. That's okay.
that they are basically going to continue to believing that it is a genocide regardless.
Yeah, because it is. Regardless of Marxist-Leninism bullshit, yeah, it was a genocide. Much like the new genocide that we've learned about today. The USSR was a pretty genocidal regime, as it turns out.
And you have someone who is so far down the ideological rabbit hole that they will straight up dismiss the scientific conclusions of the paid professionals whose job it is to research these things.
Projection, if I ever saw it. Marxist-Leninists are the biggest projection machines in the universe. You can give them any fact, you can give them any historical occurrence, they will twist it into a pretzel and present it as the opposite of what happened.
So they can continue to believe whatever they want to believe about the world. Then what you have is an individual who is...
Stupid victims of genocide saying that it was genocide. They're just ideologically driven.
By very definition, not a neutral observer. What you have...
Exactly. You're not a neutral observer. You are in fact very ideologically driven. Correct.
Is a bad faith actor. One who is
Correct again. You are a pretty bad faith actor. And I dare you to call me on the Holodomor thing. I will pull out sources and I will do that video dedicated to the Holodomor. First, it was bad empanada. Now it's you. So I guess I'm just more motivated to do the video now. It's been a long time. It's time to get to it. It's time to do it. Finally.
Fundamentally intellectually dishonest. But I digress.
I know.
This is the unfortunate reality of the situation, but whoever wins a debate is a pretty subjective question, and people oftentimes disagree on who the real winner actually is.
I
So
don't care about that.
when these content creators platform Nazis and destroy them with facts and logic, even if it appears to most people that the liberal centrist has won, there are still thousands of young
Yes. Vaush, the liberal centrist. This is ridiculous.
and impressionable minds being subjected to fascist rhetoric, and some of those people are going to resonate with some of what that Nazi has to say. These people, who under any other context wouldn't have expressed these sort of fascistic sentiments, will see
Who's the winner? Who's the wiener?
a Nazi expressing them publicly and will be emboldened by it, because
yes,
now
for sure.
they know that they're not alone. They know that there are others out there who share the same sentiments as they do. And the
for
fact
sure.
that they are being invited to these public platforms to speak these positions openly means that in a way, to be a Nazi is actually kind of socially acceptable now. When you platform Nazis, you embolden Nazis, and you expose naive and gullible individuals to Nazi rhetoric that they otherwise wouldn't have been exposed to. And in practice, you create more Nazis, irrespective of whether or not your goal
Projection.
was to reduce the number of existing Nazis at present by winning them over in the marketplace of ideas. No amount of logic or reason will turn a committed fascist from their path because people don't become fascists through logic and reason in the first place.
True. That's so true. You will not be persuaded with facts and logic because you've already decided in your mind that the USSR was a fantastic place.
And keep in mind that all of this is assuming that we are operating under a best-case scenario, in which the liberals' attempt to discredit the fascist within the context of a live debate doesn't completely backfire.
1 ml can power a home theater. True. Or even a full-on professional theater.
Some fascists are charismatic. Some of them are really good talkers. And I know
Cinema
this because I've
City.
interacted with quite a few of them. These are people who know how to cloak their bullshit behind a wall of subversion, how to utilize deliberate deception, and how to rebrand and represent
You
their
know a thing or two about these things as well. Yourself.
ideas in a way that is more sanitized and palatable to the layman. And they also know how to identify the deliberate sophistry of the liberal centrist, and in effect, how to expose them for the dishonest, narcissistic buffoons and unqualified pseudo-intellectual charlatans that they are. In this way, platforming Nazis in the pursuit of discrediting them can and absolutely has backfired on the liberal centrist before.
One can ask these prickly questions. Is
You
some
mean questions
southern
that are going to come up necessarily in the establishment of a white ethno-state? Go on.
Sure, they came up in the establishment of an Israeli state. Israel exists. It's a flourishing society. It has a national order. These are practical questions that can be answered.
You missed the
And
Israel's
Who are these people? Sargon of Akkad is a fascist. Who here is supposed to be the centrist?
Sargon, I really find you to be a very
Yeah, I
tedious and
started.
annoying
I
person.
started with good
You're
intentions,
not
Rich. Then you started
making
like acting
point.
like an ass.
Sargon, I
So
am
I'm not gonna
going
act
to say
respectfully
something
to
that
you. And I just
might
wanna
be the most
apologize.
insulting
In
thing
which
you've ever
I
heard.
will accept your apology
You
whenever you're ready
think-
to give it. Just go
You
ahead.
think that
Is Sargon of Akkad supposed to be the centrist here?
you are more intelligent than you are?
How intelligent am I?
I don't think you're very intelligent.
When Richard Spencer, of all people, is coming off as the mature voice of reason in a discussion about ethnic cleansing, and
What? This is mature and reasonable? According to fellow traveler, this is the... Is this how mature and reasonable looks like in this person's eyes? I rest my case, I guess.
and is actively shining light onto the ignorant smugness and intellectual dishonesty of
And Sargon of Akkad is supposedly a centrist. That's news to me that Sargon of Akkad is a centrist.
his liberal opponent, that is Sargon of Akkad.
Liberal. Sargon of Akkad, who also wants an ethno-state. I would remind you. A white ethno-state. Sargon of Akkad is the centrist.
What you have is a scenario where the liberal centrist, who was trying to discredit fascism, inadvertently
Sargon of Akkad, the liberal centrist. You cannot make this up. Amazing. No wonder President Sunday is probably not gonna cover this.
making fascism look good. And the more that they do these debates...
Yeah, I'm sorry. Sargon of Akkad was always pretty firmly right-leaning.
The more that they're only going to help the far-right improve and sharpen their rhetorical and debate skills over time.
I know. I've been keeping tabs on Sargon of Akkad for quite a long time.
Increasing the likelihood that we have more Sargons versus Spencers in the future. Liberal centrists, by and large, put way too much emphasis on the
yes. Vaush, Sargon of Akkad, same people really. Same people.
Value of these debates, acting as though the correct ideas are destined to come out on top, when the fact of the matter is that these online debates don't really accomplish anything meaningful in the real world. Again, you cannot debate away the incorrect positions because the people who gravitate towards these positions don't do so thanks to their superior logic and knowledge on the subject.
True. You've demonstrated it with your opinions on the Holodomor. Thank you.
They gravitate towards these positions due to a combination of surrounding material circumstances and external influences during their daily life. It's the same reason why we can't debate away capitalism. We have to fight it. Now, what exactly it means to fight is an entirely different question, the answer to which depends on the context, time, and place. I'm not telling you to go join ISIS or start a riot or something. What I'm saying is...
It means to fight capitalism is to find an ethnic group, look up their names in the yellow pages, and then execute them or something. You know, the good old USSR style. Just execute them. Look them up in the yellow pages.
Is if you want to quell the far right, then the most effective and meaningful way to do that is by becoming an active participant in anti-fascist action. Antifa should be the first thing that these liberal centrists should be calling for if they sincerely want to combat the fascists, not platforming them and legitimizing them in front of a live audience of thousands of young and impressionable children for the world to see. And so these people are not principled anti-fascists. To make matters worse, they're actually democratic partisans. And
there is a way, there is a pretty good way that the Soviet Union dealt with impressionable children. You simply kill the dad, send mom away to Siberia or something, and give the child away to orphanage. And there, you can mold their impressionable mind any way you want. It's a win-win scenario. It's amazing. It's very effective. Much like in Pokemon. It's like a super effective attack in Pokemon.
And by virtue of being democratic partisans, and calling for everyone to vote blue no matter who every 2 to 4 years, These liberal centrists are, in fact, fascist enablers, since the Democratic Party is actively enabling and emboldening the rise of the far right as we speak.
Not allowing the fascists to win elections actually emboldens the fascists. Stellar logic. Because everybody knows that you have a limited amount of turns in the turn-based game of life. If you vote against fascists, everybody knows you cannot do anything else. Any activism, anything really. You've used your turn points for voting that, so you cannot do anything else. This is stupid.
Further cementing the facts that liberal anti-fascism is a complete and total joke. Another cornerstone of centrist pathology is to accuse both sides of...
Sargon was always a conservative, but not always a fascist. Have you considered that Sargon simply kept it closer to his chest at the start? I'm gonna be honest. Sargon of Akkad was always fascist-leaning. He was just more, what's the term? Mask on.
Of a given conflict of being equally bad by virtue of both sides utilizing violence against one another, and are by extension both equally deserving of criticism and condemnation, and that we need some sort of peaceful compromise between the two. I bring up the example of Israel and Palestine yet again. While Israel may be guilty of stealing Palestinian land and murdering Palestinian children, the Palestinians who take up arms against the Israeli military and kill Israeli soldiers are also bad. Since killing people is bad, and both sides are killing people, both sides are therefore bad. However, when one looks any deeper into the conflict and contextualizes that violence, one can easily come to the conclusion that the Israelis constitute an invading apartheid force with a state that was founded on completely illegitimate means via the conquest, land theft, and the ethnic cleansing of another established, internationally recognized sovereign nation, and that the Palestinian people are completely within their rights to utilize violence against the invading settler colonizers, because in doing so, they are defending their homes, their families, their livelihoods, and their land. In other words, the violence of the Palestinians is a legitimate form of self-defense, while the violence of the Israelis is an illegitimate act of hostile aggression. Unfortunately, ideological centrists fail to recognize this, and because many of them can't be bothered to do any real investigation or actually learn about what's...
Yes, the Vaush. Vaush, the famous pro-Israeli state centrist. Wait, can you remind me what Vaush was banned from Twitch for? Can you remind me what some famous thing that Vaush said that made him perma-banned on Twitch? What was it? I want to think. I think Vaush said glory to the Israeli state. That's what he said. Exactly. That's right.
Going on because the facts make them feel uncomfortable, or they don't like the aesthetics of either side, or because they don't want to be associated with an unpopular opinion out of principle, or they themselves are
That's Vaush. That's Vaush. You got him.
Israeli settler colonists. Instead, they adopt this incredibly shallow, naive...
I'm just gonna say that it's pretty interesting to call all citizens of Israel to frame them as invaders, you know? When in many cases, and it has to be recognized as well, this has to be recognized, many people that moved to Palestine that later became Israel were survivors of the Holocaust that were trying to find a safe haven. Are they invaders? Are the Holocaust survivors that were trying to find a safe haven in Palestine invaders? Riddle me this. Riddle me this, fellow traveler, if you see this video.
And historically illiterate stance of both sides bad, condemning both sides' violence despite any proclamations of neutrality on the subject. To make matters worse, by sitting on the fence post, by refusing to take a principled stand one way or another, the centrist is, in practice, not actually being a centrist at all. They are in fact being a right-winger. The reason for this is because since they perceive the violence of everyone in an isolated vacuum without any consideration for the broader
You're a Stalinist. You don't have principles.
surrounding context or material conditions, they are in effect delegitimizing the violence of everyone involved, including the violence of those who are completely within their right to utilize violence in the pursuit of their own self-preservation. They delegitimize the violence of the oppressed, which in turn directly undermines their cause, as the oppressed have no real assets, no means to broadcast their voice across the airwaves, no resources of their own with which to carry out their will. What the oppressed do have, and what they need more than anything
Then again, you say that Stalin ended the Holocaust.
else, is solidarity, alternative institutions of their own, and broad popular support from the grassroots. Centrists directly undercut this support, as well as the ability of the oppressed to cultivate said support by condemning them whenever and wherever they carry out even the most moderately tame of political violence, i.e. someone throwing a brick through a cop's window or looting
It's justifying the genocidal framework of the nation state.
a grocery store. Not to mention the fact that centrists aren't even truly opposed to all forms of political violence anyways. Regardless of how much they might invoke their both sides bad posturing, they're not actually being sincere when we critically examine their behavior. They aren't opposed to state violence and oppression conducted towards working people in most instances because they perceive that violence as legitimate. When political violence is being carried out by the far right against the far left, they certainly don't seem to mind it all that much. In some instances, they will even vocally condone said violence and cheerlead it from the sidelines.
Who's this?
The rioting needs to fucking stop. And if that means like white redneck fucking militia dudes out there mowing down dipshit protesters that think that they can torch buildings at 10 p.m., then at this point they have my fucking blessing, because holy shit.
I'm gonna be honest. I wouldn't call Destiny a centrist either. Like, Destiny is far more right-leaning at this point than anything. Like, far, like, pretty damn right-leaning.
This fucking shit needs to stop. It needed to stop a long time ago.
But even operating under the assumption that centrists are opposed to all forms of violence on principle, centrist condemnation of reactionary violence has no real bearing or negative impact on the right in its ability to exert its will like it does on the left since, well, they're the status quo.
Center-right? Maybe.
They're the ones with the wealth, the power, the influence, the big institutional backing, and the resources at their disposal to do as they please, irrespective of the centrist criticisms or token opposition. Sure, they might deliver scathing condemnations of the state of Israel, but it's not going to matter because the right wing dominates the media and controls nearly all of the avenues by which regular people receive information about the world. So they can simply amplify the pro-Israeli voices and sentiments, keeping the centrists around on a leash as controlled opposition, and drowning any and all anti-colonial voices out of the media. So even if an ideological centrist is opposed to reactionary violence, it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things because talk is cheap. The powers that be possess all of the cards and have the entire—
I mean, you're quite literally just talking. Hello, Giselle Santarelli. What brings you to the stream? How did you find the stream? If you've been here before and I don't remember, then I apologize. But in the meantime, join the page and tell me how you found the stream. But hello. But yes.
entire deck stacked in their favor, and centrists are directly opposed to anyone utilizing the political violence needed in order to save countless innocent people from being victimized by criminal actors who routinely perpetrate violence at the expense of others for personal gain. In conclusion, these are the natural—
yes, says fellow traveler, the biggest warrior for leftism. Jesus. Oof. It's my first stream. The subject totally caught my eye. Thank you. I hope you will enjoy yourself. And I hope that you will consider subscribing and joining the page. I sincerely hope so. We've actually done a lot of talking about this video. We've actually discovered a little bit of a genocide that the USSR has done in the 30s against Polish people. Isn't that interesting? So we're learning a lot today. Also, since this is your first stream, Lucy Haze, the biggest Polish trans streamer who does history, art, video games, and languages as well. I've not done a language segment in a long time, but I do plan to do a lot more language segments soon. So look forward to that. This guy stole President Sunday's argument and bastardized it. Correct. I actually wholeheartedly agree with President Sunday's argument, by the way. I covered his centrism video. Oh yes, I'm also President Sunday's biggest orbiter. I mean, look at the books. Look at the books. Of course I'm a President Sunday orbiter. Okay, let's go. Let's just continue with this. This is turning into a ramble real quick.
Consequences of treating political neutrality as a virtue and taking pride in one's own ignorance. People like this sit on the fence post on these crucial issues so they can assume the moral high ground over the extremists who they perceive with all this blood on their hands, since they are centrists and by extension are able to psychologically dissociate themselves from any group, individuals, or ideas with aesthetics that they don't—
You call everyone who's not a Marxist-Leninist a centrist.
like.
You put Vaush in the same centrist camp as Sargon of Akkad. I am not treating this seriously.
They fail to realize that by sitting on the fence post and choosing to dissociate from any position they deem too controversial, that they remove themselves from the ability to discover the real truth of a matter and meaningfully affect change around them. And not to be cliché, but those who stand for nothing will fall for anything. And so centrism is little more than a modernized, rebranded version.
Yeah, just like you have fallen for Marxist-Leninism. Because you stand for nothing. You're a genocide denier. You did a whole spiel about the Holodomor. And he praised Richard Spencer, right? Saying that Richard Spencer sounded mature and reasonable.
Of conservatism. They don't want to rock the boat too much. They want to conserve the system as we know it today. Sure, they might pay lip service to progressive policy, but they don't actually care about enacting it in the grand scheme of things. Instead, they keep faith that the status quo will magically solve these problems given enough time, that we don't actually need to struggle for anything, and to struggle for change and to rock the boat is actually a bad—
Who are you talking about? Who are you talking about? Who is this mythical centrist that hopes that the status quo will take care of everything? Who is that person? Is it Vaush? Is it Sargon of Akkad? Who is it?
Thing. Hence why they condemn any sort of political violence undertaken during the Black Lives Matter protests.
Oh, yeah.
Or why they think Biden did the right thing
because Vaush totally did that.
By busting up the railway workers' strike, since the strike would have caused shortages and inconvenienced customers at supermarkets and grocery stores. Mark my words, viewer. When the chips are down, when socialist revolution is on the horizon, these liberals, these ideologically committed centrists, will immediately become white guardists at the drop of a hat. They will stand in solidarity with the counter-revolutionary forces of reaction in order to stop it and to restore the status quo, since in their eyes, the revolutionaries are violent, authoritarian, dictatorial, tankies, red fash, etc. And it is for these—
Yeah, you're a great example of that. There's another article that we'll briefly look at.
These reasons why centrism is inherently right-wing. For all of their bravado about the marketplace of ideas and hearing out both sides of a discussion, these people need to take their own advice and investigate the true history of the workers' movement and how the world as we know it came to be today.
Wait, what did the USSR do to workers? What did the USSR do to workers? Let me remind you for a bit. So, the following categories of people were arrested by the NKVD during the Polish operation as described in Soviet documents. No, that's not the part that I want to find. There was this nice part when let me check. Work. Oh, there we go. The operation took place approximately in August 25th, 1937 to November 15th, 1938. The largest group of people with a Polish background. We are learning the true history of the workers' movement, by the way. Around 40% of all victims came from Soviet Ukraine, especially from the district near the border with Poland. Among them were tens of thousands of peasants, railway workers, industrial laborers, engineers, and others. Interesting way that the USSR dealt with its workers in its workers' movement by arresting them and executing them. I guess that's just the Marxist-Leninist way of dealing with the worker question.
Not so they can continue to refuse to come to concrete conclusions, morally posture, and take pride in their own ignorance, but because we need more communists, and the fastest way to turn people to communism is with a proper history lesson.
Projection. Communism does not equal Marxist-Leninism. Communism does not equal Maoism. Communism does not equal the USSR. Communism does not equal China. Let me show you something. We will finish the segment with this, okay? We will revisit the greatest hits of the USSR. Oh, well, what do you know? Another thing that can be classified as genocide. We are discovering the genocides. All right, let's do this. I'm ready. Are you ready? I sure am. Oh boy, I sure am. The Katyn Massacre. Have you heard of that one? Have you heard of the Katyn Massacre? Guess we're gonna learn a little bit about it from the Wikipedia. Again, if this person questions the Wikipedia, I'm glad to look for sources. The Katyn massacre was a series of mass executions of nearly 22,000 Polish military officers and intelligentsia prisoners of war, because, you know, it is the modus operandi of Soviet/Russian to just kill prisoners of war or torture them, usually to death. Carried out by the Soviet Union, specifically the NKVD, People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs, the Soviet secret police. In April and May 1940, though the killings also occurred in the Kalinin and Kharkiv prisons and elsewhere, the massacre is named after the Katyn forest, where some of the mass graves were first discovered by German Nazi forces, of all people. Isn't that interesting? And do you know what the best part of this all is? It's that the USSR did the mass killing, turned around and said, oh yeah, it was Germany. It was totally Germany that did it. It was totally Germany. It was totally not us. The order to execute captive members of the Polish officer corps was secretly issued by the Soviet Politburo, led by Joseph Stalin. But how dare you compare Joseph Stalin to Adolf Hitler? How even dare you? Of the total killed, about 8,000 were officers imprisoned during the 1939 Soviet invasion of Poland. Another 6,000 were police officers, and the remaining 8,000 were Polish intelligentsia, the Soviet deemed to be intelligence agents and gendarmes, spies and saboteurs, former landowners, factory owners, and officials. The Polish army officers class was representative of the multi-ethnic Polish state. The murdered included ethnic Poles, Belarusians, and 700 to 900 Polish Jews, including the chief rabbi of the Polish army, Baruch Steinberg. The government of Nazi Germany announced the discovery of mass graves in the Katyn forest in April 1943. Stalin severed diplomatic relations with the London-based Polish government in exile when it asked for an investigation by the International Committee of the Red Cross. How interesting. After the Vistula-Oder offensive, where the mass graves fell into Soviet control, the Soviet Union claimed that the Nazis had killed the victims, and it continued to deny responsibility for the massacres until 1990, when it officially acknowledged the condemned the killings by the NKVD, as well as the subsequent cover-up by the Soviet government. Well, maybe that's fake as well. Maybe... what's his face? Fellow traveler will say that it didn't happen. Maybe that's fake. Who knows? Who knows? An investigation conducted by the Office of the Prosecutors General of the Soviet Union 1990-1991 and the Russian Federation 1991-2004 confirmed Soviet responsibility for the massacre, but refused to classify this action as a war crime or as an act of mass murder. Wow. What was it then? It was not a war crime, and it was not mass murder. Interesting. What was it then? Perpetrators were dead, and since the Russian government would not classify the dead as victims of the Great Purge, formal posthumous rehabilitation was deemed inapplicable. In November 2010, hoping to improve relations with Poland, the Russian State Duma approved a declaration condemning Stalin and other Soviet officials for ordering the massacre. However, with the Russo-Ukrainian War, the relations became strained. In 2021, the Russian Ministry of Culture downgraded the memorial complex at Katyn on its register of sites of cultural heritage from a place of federal to one of only regional importance. And it started with the invasion of Poland, which was a purely defensive act out of pure desperation. Isn't this interesting? The executions. If it was really a genocide, then why are we denying it happened? Right. Okay. So I guess we can finish the segment here. You think Haas is smarter than this guy? Well, we will finish it here. If you found this segment informative, if you found this segment interesting, then please consider subscribing to YouTube, hitting the bell, joining the White Forest page, subscribing on the White Forest page, donating, because that is what keeps the channel afloat and allows me to grow and do better things with the channel, to improve of the things. And comment below if you want me to go in depth about the topics discussed today. The Holodomor, the Katyn massacre, the Polish operation of the NKVD. We can have more in-depth dedicated segments about those topics. And I can look into sources that are different than the wiki, no problem. And give you a very coherent and streamlined segments about those things. Okay, we're done.